The Fleet of Lionesses by Jansen Davies. Chapter 1. The Half-Blood Spark. The moon had no name. It had been stripped of one long ago, along with its oceans, its archives, and its dignity. Now it was just a husk, orbiting a forgotten gas giant, its surface pocked with tribunal ruins and the bones of failed diplomacy. Lornella Shore stood barefoot in the dust, her mother's blood still warm on her palms. The tribunal had left. Not in haste, not in shame, but in triumph. 12 male judges from 12 alien systems, each cloaked in ceremonial arrogance, had declared her mother guilty of emotional subversion. The sentence, death by neural unraveling. They called it justice. Lornella had watched it all. The way her mother's memories were peeled from her mind like petals from a dying flower. The way the Dorelli empath's final thoughts, love, defiance, sorrow, had shimmered in the air before vanishing into the void. She knelt beside the body, herself half human, half Dorelli, and wholly unwanted. Her hybrid blood had always been a curse, too volatile for the humans, too impure for the aliens. She had been denied rank, denied voice, denied grief. But now something ancient stirred in her chest, not rage, not vengeance, a need to be heard. Lornella rose. Her eyes glowed with the bioluminescent hue of her mother's people. She walked into the ruins, past the shattered amphitheater and the rusted memory spires. At the center stood the old broadcast tower, still functional, still forbidden. She climbed it. The wind howled, the stars blinked, and Lornella spoke. To every woman who has been silenced, to every daughter who has been discarded, to every sister who has been told she is less, we are not theirs to break. The signal pulsed outward, encoded in emotion, encrypted in pain. It reached the outer colonies first, then the slave moons, then the breeding stations, then the forgotten ships drifting between systems. Millions heard it, and somewhere in the cold dark of space, a concubine sharpened her blade. A pilot rerouted her freighter, a scientist burned her research, and a warlord smiled. Lornella descended the tower, her mother's name etched into her skin with a blade of memory. She did not mourn. She did not pray. She began the fight. Chapter 2. The Silenced. The signal traveled faster than light, not because of its frequency, but because of its fury. Encoded in Lornella's voice was something no encryption could mask: pain, memory, and the undeniable truth of injustice. It reached the outer systems first, places where silence had long been mistaken for peace. On the frost moons of Corel, the songweavers paused mid-hymn. Their voices, once used to soothe the minds of warlords, now trembled with rage. One by one they shattered their harmonic collars and began to sing a new melody, one of uprising. In the breeding chambers of Karnath, engineers who had been reduced to wombs and wire heard Lornella's words and rewired their captors' neural grids. The facility went dark. The women emerged not as survivors, but as tacticians. On the slave barges of the Threxian Drift, concubines turned assassins. They used their ornamental blades, once symbols of submission, to carve escape routes through titanium hulls. The stars watched and did not blink. Each woman who heard the signal had a story. Jara, a blind pilot from the shattered world of Mir, who once flew reconnaissance missions for a regime that erased her name. Lunari, a telepathic orphan who had been sold to a psychic syndicate and forced to read the minds of criminals until her own fractured. Ven, a former pleasure model who had hacked her own programming and now led a cybernetic rebellion from the underbelly of the orbital markets. They did not know Lornella, but they knew her voice. It was the voice of every mother who had been silenced, every daughter who had been discarded, every sister who had been told she was less. Across the galaxy, ships began to move, Freighters rerouted, mining vessels were repurposed, abandoned warships were reactivated. The fleet of Lionesses began to form, not in one place, but everywhere. It was not a fleet of uniformity. It was a fleet of fury. The male rulers noticed. They called it a disturbance, a glitch, a hormonal anomaly. They were wrong. Lornella stood aboard the Morning Star, watching the fleet assemble in orbit around the shattered moon. Her generals arrived one by one, each carrying scars, stories, and weapons forged in the blood of battle. She did not give orders. She gave permission. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are not finished. The galaxy trembled. And somewhere on a planet that had never known rebellion, a young girl heard the signal and smiled. Her time would come. Chapter 3. The Fleet of Lionesses. The scrap yards of the galaxy had always been silent witnesses, rusted hulls, burnt-out engines, derelict warships left to rot after treaties were signed by men who never fought in them. But now they stirred. Lornella's signal had done more than awaken the oppressed. It had awakened the forgotten. Across 100 systems, women emerged from exile, captivity, and servitude to reclaim what had been discarded. They didn't build a fleet from scratch. They resurrected one from history. On the acid plains of Drexar, a group of exiled engineers unearthed the Vanguard, a dreadnought buried beneath centuries of toxic sediment. Its reactor still pulsed. Its AI, once decommissioned, whispered, "Welcome back." In the orbital junk rings of Karnath, scavenger crews fused freighter hulls with stolen military tech. The result, hybrid warships with unpredictable firepower and unmatched maneuverability. They called them ghost wings because they moved like phantoms and struck like vengeance. On the moon of Ashara, Lornella stood before her flagship, the Morning Star. Once a diplomatic cruiser, now retrofitted with stealth plating, psychic shielding, and a command deck carved with the names of the fallen. It was not the biggest ship, but it was the loudest. Her generals arrived. Jara, the blind tactician, wore a neural visor that mapped battlefields through sound and emotion. She had once guided convoys through war zones blindfolded, her instincts sharper than any radar. Lunari, the telepathic assassin, had no need for weapons. She could fracture minds with a whisper. Her past was a blur of captivity and forced readings. Now she read only for vengeance. Ven, the warlord, had once been a concubine in the pleasure palaces of Threxia. She escaped by detonating the palace reactor with a kiss. Her armor was made from the bones of her captors. Her ship, the Velvet Guillotine, was feared across 5 sectors. They did not salute Lornella. They stood beside her. The fleet grew. From the ice moons came the cryo-blades. From the desert worlds came the dust howlers. From the deep space colonies came the sister arcs, ships that carried entire populations of liberated women. The male rulers watched. They called it chaos. They called it hysteria. They called it impossible. They were wrong. Lornella stood on the bridge of the Morning Star, watching the fleet assemble in orbit. It was not uniform. It was not orderly. It was mythic. We are the fire they tried to bury. We are the fleet they forgot. We are the war they never saw coming. The stars dimmed, and somewhere on a planet still ruled by silence, a young girl looked up and whispered, "Soon." Chapter 4. The Male Response. The patriarchs convened in the Council of Sovereigns, a floating citadel above the gas giant Shorex. 12 systems represented, 12 male rulers, 12 blindfolds of ego. They watched Lornella's fleet assemble and laughed. "She's throwing a tantrum," said the High Chancellor of Karnath, sipping from a chalice carved from the bones of his predecessors. "A hormonal uprising," muttered the Threxian warlord, adjusting his ceremonial blade. "A temporary disturbance," declared Commander Jalen Shore, Lornella's half-brother, his voice colder than the moons he governed. They did not send armies. They sent envoys, polished diplomats, hollow apologies, offers of dialogue and healing. They spoke of misunderstanding, of cultural differences, of the need for unity. They offered reparations in the form of statues and songs. Lornella stood on the bridge of the Morning Star, watching the envoy ship approach. It was sleek, silver, and smug, broadcasting peace signals and pre-recorded apologies. She let them speak. We recognize the pain. We regret the past. We offer reconciliation. Lornella didn't respond with words. She responded with fire. The Morning Star's plasma cannons locked onto the envoy ship mid-transmission. The blast was surgical. The ship disintegrated in a burst of violet flame, its signal cut off with a final, unfinished apology. The galaxy gasped. The Council of Sovereigns called it madness. They called it terrorism. They called it proof of instability. They were wrong. Across 100 systems, women who had hesitated now moved. The signal had been a spark. The fleet had been a promise. But this was the ignition. Lornella turned to her generals. No more envoys. No more apologies. No more waiting. The war began. On Zarun 9, the first male stronghold fell within hours. On Threxia, pleasure palaces were converted into command centers. On Karnath, the breeding chambers were detonated, their ashes scattered into orbit. The male coalition scrambled. They deployed fleets. They activated sleeper agents. They tried to fracture the Lionesses. But the women were no longer scattered. They were legion. They were a pride. And somewhere on a planet still ruled by silence, a young girl watched the stars burn and whispered, "Finally." Chapter 5. The First Planet Falls. Zarun 9 had always been a planet of extraction. Its core was rich with thermosite, a volatile mineral used to power warships and suppress rebellions. The male overseers called it the Spine of Empire. The women called it the Cage. The mining colony sprawled across the equator, steel corridors, acid pits, and barracks built to break bodies. Overseers patrolled with neural whips and biometric trackers. The women who worked there were not miners. They were property. Until the fleet arrived. Lornella's armada descended like an angry storm. Ghost wings pierced the atmosphere. Cryoblades froze the defense grid. The Morning Star hovered above the colony, casting a shadow that felt like prophecy. The overseers scrambled. They activated suppression fields. They broadcast surrender codes. They begged. Lornella ignored them. She led the ground assault herself, flanked by Jara and Ven. Lunari fractured the minds of the command staff before they could fire a single shot. The battle lasted 17 minutes. The liberation lasted longer. Each woman in the colony was given a choice, vengeance or justice. Most chose both. The overseers were captured, not executed, not tortured, tried. In the ruins of the central refinery, Lornella convened a tribunal, not of judges, but of survivors. Each overseer was forced to listen as the women recounted their scars, their stolen years, their erased names. The sentence, exile. They were placed aboard a derelict freighter and sent to Mern, a barren moon with no atmosphere, no resources, and no audience. A place where silence would finally be earned. The colony was renamed. No longer Zarun 9, no longer a spine of empire. The women called it Ashara, a Direli word meaning rebirth. They planted memory trees in the acid pits. They carved poems into the steel corridors. They built schools, not barracks. And above the central dome, they etched Lornella's signal in every known language. We are not theirs to break. The galaxy noticed. Some systems called it barbarism. Others called it prophecy. But all felt the tremor. One planet had fallen. 100 more would follow. And somewhere on a world still ruled by silence, a young girl traced the word Ashara into the dust and whispered, "Thank you." Chapter 6. The Betrayal of Blood. Shore Prime was once a cradle of diplomacy. Now it was a fortress. The skies above it swarmed with male coalition warships, sleek, angular, and soulless. The planet's surface was carved into defense grids, psychic amplifiers, and orbital strike platforms. At its heart stood the Citadel of Sovereigns, where Commander Jalen Shore prepared for war. He was Lornella's half-brother, born of the same father, raised in opposite worlds. Where she had been silenced, he had been groomed. Where she had been cast out, he had been crowned. He believed she was lost to vengeance. Lornella believed he was still chained to ignorance. Their confrontation began in orbit. The Morning Star led the charge, flanked by ghost wings and cryo blades. The male coalition responded with precision strikes, psychic disruptors, and AI-guided missiles. The sky burned violet. But Lornella didn't come for conquest. She came for reckoning. She landed on the surface alone, walking through the ruins of the old diplomatic gardens, now scorched and weaponized. Jalen met her there, flanked by guards, his mind shielded by a neural lattice. "You've become what you hate," he said. "No," Lornella replied. "I've become what you feared." Their psychic clash was silent but seismic. Memories collided, childhood echoes, shared grief, divergent truths. Jalen tried to fracture her resolve with guilt. Lornella countered with clarity. She showed him the tribunal, her mother's death, the scars hidden beneath her skin. He showed her the chaos, the fear, the systems unraveling under her war. They fought without fists. They fought with memory. Above them, the fleets clashed. Orbital strikes lit the sky. Psychic amplifiers shattered. The Citadel trembled. Lornella could have ended him. She had the power, the precision, the pain. But she didn't. She stepped back, eyes glowing with restraint. "Next time I see you," she said, "I won't." Jalen fell to his knees, not in defeat, but in revelation. His guards did not move. His neural lattice flickered. And somewhere deep within the Citadel, the first cracks in the male coalition began to form. Lornella returned to her ship. She did not celebrate. She did not mourn. She prepared. And somewhere on a planet still ruled by silence, a young girl watched the confrontation broadcast across forbidden channels and whispered, "She spared him." For now. Chapter 7. The 100-Planet Uprising. It began with whispers. On the desert world of Karnath, a mechanic sabotaged the governor's transport and broadcast Lornella's signal through the planetary grid. On Threxia, a concubine detonated the palace reactor and carved the word Ashara into the rubble. On Shorelia, songweavers turned their harmonics into weapons, collapsing the orbital towers with a single unified note. Then the whispers became war cries. 100 planets erupted. Some rebellions were swift, command centers overrun, male rulers exiled, flags of the galactic Lioness Accord raised before sunrise. Others were brutal, streets soaked in blood, orbital strikes met with psychic retaliation, daughters fighting beside mothers in battles that rewrote history. Lornella did not command these uprisings. She ignited them. Her fleet split into factions, each led by one of her generals. Some male rulers saw the tide and surrendered. They pledged allegiance to the Lionesses, offered reparations, and opened their archives. Lornella accepted, but never forgot. Others resisted. They fell. The galaxy fractured. Trade routes collapsed. Alliances dissolved. Propaganda networks imploded under the weight of truth. The old order tried to brand Lornella a terrorist, a murderer, a virus. But the signal kept pulsing. "We are not theirs to break." On Ashara, the liberated women convened, not to celebrate, to build. They formed the Galactic Lioness Accord, a new order forged from justice, memory, and myth. Its founding principles were etched into the stars, no voice silenced, no body owned, no history erased. Lornella did not take a throne. She took a seat among equals, among survivors, among architects of a future no longer built on silence. And somewhere on a planet still ruled by fear, a young girl watched the lioness's signal flicker across the sky and whispered, "We're coming." Chapter 8. The Siege of Sol. Earth had become the final stronghold. The male coalition, fractured and desperate, poured its remaining resources into Sol. AI-controlled fleets patrolled the skies. Propaganda drones flooded the networks with images of Lornella gone rogue. Cities floated above oceans, tethered by fear and legacy. Lornella landed in New Geneva. It was the city where her mother had once served as a diplomat, before the tribunal, before the unraveling. Now it was a fortress of denial. She walked through fire and blood, her boots echoing in marble halls once built for peace. The battle was cinematic. Sky cities collapsed under orbital strikes. Oceans boiled as thermosite reactors detonated. Psychic warfare rippled through the minds of soldiers, turning commands into confessions. The morning star hovered above Earth like a judgment, its cannons silent, its signal loud. "We are not theirs to break." Jalen Shore, her half-brother, led the defense. But something had shifted. His orders faltered. His fleet hesitated. His mind, once shielded, now trembled in fear. He remembered his sister's warning and fled. He pointed his ships toward the outer reaches of the galaxy and ran as fast as his hyperdrives could take him. Lornella reached the citadel of memory, where her mother's name had been erased from the archives. She carved it back in with a blade of light. The war did not end with annihilation. It ended with reckoning. Epilogue. The signal remains. The war had ended, but the stars still remembered. Across the galaxy, the ruins of old empires were repurposed into sanctuaries, archives, and gardens. The Galactic Lioness Accord governed not with dominance, but with memory. Every liberated world bore the scars of battle and the seeds of rebirth. Statues of Lornella Shore rose on 100 planets. Not as a queen, not as a conqueror, but as a message. Her likeness stood in the gardens of Ashara, carved from thermosite and memory. In the floating cities of Threxia, her voice echoed through the learning halls. On the frost moons of Shorelia, children sang her signal in harmonic chorus. "We are not theirs to break." No one knew where she had gone. Some believed she had ascended into the psychic ether, becoming part of the signal itself. Others claimed she walked among the stars in disguise, watching, listening, waiting. A few whispered that she had returned to the forgotten moon, where it all began, to mourn, to rest, to vanish. But her legacy did not vanish. Whenever a woman was silenced, the signal returned. In the hum of a freighter's engine, in the pulse of a newborn's cry, in the quiet defiance of a girl who refused to kneel. The galaxy had changed, not perfectly, not completely, but irrevocably. And somewhere on a planet still ruled by silence, a young girl stood beneath the stars, her hand pressed to the soil, her heart echoing with fire. She whispered the words, "We are not theirs to break." And the stars answered. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.